Since this is the last segment of the course and we've been talking about public policy and elections, I want to take this opportunity to give a series of recommendations for policy reforms, things that come out of my own research and come from things we've learned in this class. This is what I think we should do to change election requirements and law, and that will result in elections that are much more secure and trustworthy. First, we need strengthened and more uniform standards. The existing patchwork of state-by-state laws just create endless trouble. Election standards, furthermore, should cover the entire election system, not just the equipment used at polling places. The only way to completely secure an election system is to think about security requirements on the whole system level. You can't break it down into individual pieces, or you're going to miss attacks. Standards should address more than just security. They should address accuracy, security, accessibility, usability, and transparency. These are all critically important features. Finally, whatever standards are in place should require public reporting and disclosure of problems. As it is, there's too much incentive for election officials and others in the process to keep quiet about any problems they find. No one likes to admit that they've made a mistake in purchasing a certain kind of voting system, and election officials often worry about undermining public confidence in elections by admitting that something's gone wrong. It's much better for everyone if we're transparent about problems, because that gives us an opportunity to make rational decisions about what needs to be strengthened and how much we can trust things. So this kind of disclosure ought to be mandatory under a strengthened, uniform set of standards. My next recommendations are about election administration. Election officials have a really tough job to do, but as they're doing that job, they need to ensure that there's adequate transparency and public participation in the process. These are both the best ways to weed out the possibility of insider fraud and corruption, and also the best way to increase public confidence in the system in a rational way. In order to do these things and to provide election systems that are secure, election officials are going to need resources. And unfortunately, we often spend far too little money on election administration. This results in the continued use of technology and equipment that's known to be inadequate or proven to be insecure. Election officials need ample resources to purchase secure equipment, to store it and use it in a trustworthy way, and to include security procedures like audits and recounts before election results are declared. In addition to these things, we as a society may want to reconsider some of the ways that we use the electoral system. For instance, there are far too many questions on ballots in the United States for the system to be usable and for it to be simple to administer. If we were able to reduce the number of questions we were asking voters, voters could make more informed choices, election technology would be more usable, and there would be opportunity to reduce the complexity of the entire system. The most important security recommendation I have to make is that standards need to incorporate provisions for routine testing and auditing. First of all, whatever voting technology we use just has to be auditable. Audits are the best defense we know against the kinds of malfunctions or malicious behavior that have been demonstrated with paperless DREs. Part of testing and auditing is testing before an election to smoke out any kinds of usability problems or reliability problems that might interfere with voters effectively casting their votes on election day. These kinds of tests are relatively easy to do and effective. In addition, after elections, we should perform routine post-election auditing using risk-limiting methods to achieve a high level of confidence. This is the best defense we have against all of the problems with DREs that we've seen in this course. Finally, because election certification, the process of declaring the winners, is currently something that there's tremendous time pressure for officials to do, we need to reform the standards that are in place to make sure that there's sufficient time before results are declared to perform any necessary audits and recounts. This is just common sense because after the election results are declared, it's extremely hard to undo them, even if there's widespread evidence of fraud. I think the biggest takeaway from this course should be that we ought to adopt a conservative approach to introducing any new technology into the election process. One of the most obvious implications of this is that internet voting, because of all the things that can go wrong, all the massive risks, should be prohibited and not adopted for the foreseeable future, at least until there are some major breakthroughs in security. Another implication of this conservative approach is that if someone proposes adding new technology to the election process, we should make sure that it really solves an actual problem we have. Too many times through the history of voting, we've seen technology introduced to solve one problem and then not actually solving it so well, or perhaps even creating a new problem. So this is something we should carefully scrutinize. In order to make sure that technology that's introduced doesn't cause new problems, we need to make sure that there are adequate testing processes in place. That is, testing processes that are realistic, that are open to the public, and that are independent from conflicts of interest. The best testing process we know of for security is one that involves simulated adversarial testing, the kind of open-ended testing we talked about. And any standards that are adopted have to have provisions for that. Finally, the best definition that we know of for what makes a voting system adequate from the perspective of computer security is the idea of software independence. Software independence should be a requirement for any election technology. This brings us to the end of the course, but I'd like to leave all of you with some ideas about things you can do to make elections better and more secure wherever it might be that you vote. The first thing you can do is discuss the kinds of security problems we've talked about with your friends, your family, your neighbors, people in your community. This way we can start a wider public discussion about election security problems and help kick off initiatives to solve them. The next thing you could try doing is reaching out to your local election officials. Start a conversation about whatever concerns you have. You might learn something from them about the kinds of protections they have in place, or they might learn some things from you about problems they might face. You could also try to get in touch with your elected representatives in Congress or in Parliament, talk to them about the things you learned, and encourage them to enact election reforms of the type we talked about in this last lecture. If you want to learn more about election security, we've provided dozens of links from the course webpage to virtually all of the research and other online literature. You can use what you learned in this course as a starting off point. You're well on your way to becoming an expert. One great thing to do would be to volunteer as a poll worker or an election observer. Your local election officials, I'm sure, would appreciate the help, and it would give you a chance to apply the security mindset at the real polls. Perhaps you'll spot some things going wrong. Finally, the most important thing to do is to actually vote. The only way to know that your vote isn't going to count is to not cast one. But as you vote, pay careful attention to the polling place, to the process around you. You can be a micro-observer, and that will give you yet another chance to apply the security mindset and potentially even spot problems. That brings us to the end of the course. I'd just like to thank you all so very, very much for taking part and for participating these past 5 weeks. I hope you've all learned a lot and had a lot of fun. I certainly did myself in putting this class together. Now, I hope you come away from the course a better informed citizen, that you're able to understand technology critically, apply the security mindset. This is going to make you better equipped to take part in society's broader discussions about the future of the election process. Now you can do your part to secure our digital democracy.